The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine driveway of the Miller estate. Sarah Miller stood motionless, her navy dress uniform crisp against the October chill. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd faced enemy fire. But today, the battlefield was home. Her father's mansion loomed before her 4 stories of Georgian brick and broken promises. The same house where her mother had died 3 months ago, alone and forgotten. Richard Miller's silver Bentley gleamed in the circular drive, a monument to his success. Sarah's fingers tightened around the manila envelope in her hands. Inside those documents lay the power to destroy everything he'd built. The front door opened with its familiar creak, unchanged since her childhood. "Sarah?" Her father's voice echoed from the marble foyer, surprise bleeding through his usual commanding tone. Richard Miller emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose, confusion etched across his weathered features. Behind him, like a shadow in designer heels, came Vanessa. The woman was 40 but dressed like 25, her bleached hair catching the morning light streaming through stained glass windows. The same woman who'd answered her mother's phone calls during those final, painful weeks. "What are you doing here?" Richard asked, his businessman's smile faltering. Sarah didn't move from the doorway, her military bearing making the grand foyer seem smaller. "I brought you something, Dad." The word Dad rolled off her tongue like broken glass. Vanessa stepped closer to Richard, her manicured fingers finding his arm with practiced ease. "Honey, who is this?" she asked, though they both knew exactly who Sarah was. Richard's jaw tightened, that familiar vein pulsing at his temple. "This is my daughter, Vanessa." Sarah's eyes swept the foyer, taking inventory of what had changed since the funeral. Her mother's antique vase gone, replaced by something modern and soulless. The family portraits repositioned to make room for new photographs featuring Vanessa's radiant smile. Even the air smelled different, heavy with expensive perfume instead of her mother's lavender sachets. "I see you've redecorated," Sarah observed, her voice carrying the steady calm she'd learned in combat zones. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his Italian leather shoes squeaking against the marble floor. "Sarah, if you've come to discuss your mother's estate again..." "Actually, I came to discuss yours." The manila envelope crinkled as Sarah opened it with deliberate precision. Legal documents spilled into view, stamped and notarized, bearing the seal of the county courthouse. Richard's face drained of color as his eyes scanned the papers. "What is this?" Vanessa demanded, her voice climbing an octave. Sarah's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Acid freeze orders, Dad." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. "Every account you share with Miss Henderson has been temporarily suspended pending investigation." Richard's reading glasses slipped down his nose as he grabbed the documents. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can." Sarah's voice remained steady, professional, like she was briefing superior officers. "Turns out Mom never removed her name from your joint accounts." Vanessa stumbled backward, her designer heel catching on the Persian rug. "That's impossible," she breathed. "And since I'm executor of Mom's estate, I have legal authority to freeze any assets connected to her accounts." Richard's hands trembled as he flipped through page after page of legal documentation. "The investigation should take about 90 days, Sarah continued. "Maybe longer, depending on what they find." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, marking the official start of their financial devastation. Richard looked up from the papers, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" For the first time since entering the house, Sarah's composure cracked. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Because 3 months ago, you told me to disappear from this family forever." The memory crashed over her like a rogue wave. Her wedding day, what should have been the happiest moment of her life. Richard pulling her aside during the reception, his breath reeking of champagne and cruelty. Those words, delivered with surgical precision, You need to disappear from this family forever. All because she dared to question Vanessa's sudden appearance at the hospital during Mom's final days. You said I wasn't welcome here anymore, Sarah continued. So, I decided to make myself unwelcome in the most effective way possible. Vanessa clutched Richard's arm, her perfectly applied makeup starting to smudge. Richard, do something. But Richard Miller, the man who'd built a real estate empire from nothing, stood frozen. His daughter, his only child, had outmaneuvered him completely. Sarah tucked the remaining documents back into the envelope with military precision. The bank managers should be calling you within the hour. She turned toward the door, her duty here complete. Oh, and Dad? She paused without looking back. This is what Mom wanted. The front door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like thunder. Sarah Miller walked back to her rental car, her shoulders straight, her conscience clear. In her rearview mirror, she watched the mansion shrink away. But the real story, the events that led to this moment, was just beginning to unfold. Behind those Georgian brick walls, Richard Miller was about to discover that his daughter had inherited more than just her mother's estate. She'd inherited her mother's steel backbone, and her capacity for justice served ice cold. 3 months earlier, the garden at the Miller estate had never looked more beautiful. White roses cascaded from every archway, their petals catching the golden afternoon light like scattered diamonds. Sarah stood in her childhood bedroom, staring at herself in the antique mirror her mother had loved. The engagement dress, a flowing cream silk that made her feel like a princess, hung perfectly on her frame. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Her engagement party, celebrating her upcoming marriage to Marcus, the Navy pilot who'd stolen her heart. Downstairs, 200 guests mingled on the manicured lawn, champagne glasses catching sunlight like tiny beacons of joy. The sound of laughter drifted through the open window, mixing with the string quartet's gentle melodies. Sarah touched the pearl necklace at her throat, her mother's final gift, given just weeks before the cancer won. For your special day, sweetheart, Mom had whispered, her frail hands shaking as she clasped the pearls. A knock at the door interrupted her memories. Come in. Richard Miller entered, resplendent in his navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled for the photographers. Ready, princess? The childhood nickname felt strange on his lips now, hollow somehow. Sarah nodded, forcing brightness into her voice. Ready, Dad. They descended the grand staircase together, Sarah's hand resting lightly on his arm. The crowd turned as one, faces beaming, cameras flashing like tiny lightning strikes. Marcus waited at the bottom, his dress whites crisp, his smile radiating pure adoration. You look incredible, he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek. Sarah felt her heart flutter. This was it, her fairy tale moment. Richard raised his champagne glass, the crowd falling silent in anticipation. To my daughter, Sarah, his voice carried across the garden with practiced authority. May she find all the happiness her mother and I always dreamed for her. Applause erupted, glasses clinked, and Sarah felt tears of joy threatening to spill. The afternoon unfolded like a perfect dream. Childhood friends shared embarrassing stories, Navy colleagues toasted her courage, and elderly relatives pinched her cheeks with loving familiarity. Marcus never left her side, his hand finding hers whenever the crowd grew overwhelming. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Sarah felt complete. This was her family, her community, her future, stretching out bright and beautiful. Richard appeared at her elbow as she chatted with her college roommate. Sarah, could I steal you for a moment? Something in his tone made her stomach flutter with unease. Of course, Dad. He guided her away from the crowd, toward the quiet corner of the garden where her mother's rose bushes bloomed in wild profusion. The spot where Mom used to sit with her morning coffee, planning her day. I need to discuss something with you, Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Sarah tilted her head, still smiling, still floating on the afternoon's joy. "What is it?" Richard's face changed, the paternal warmth draining away like water through a broken dam. His eyes grew cold, calculating, the expression he wore in boardroom negotiations. "This needs to be the last family gathering you attend." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, stealing her breath. "What?" "You heard me." Richard's voice was ice, each word carefully measured and delivered with surgical precision. "From now on, you need to disappear from this family." Sarah's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the brick pathway. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence between them. "Dad, I don't understand." "Vanessa feels uncomfortable with your constant questioning about your mother's final days." The name fell between them like a curse. "She thinks you're trying to cause problems in our relationship." Sarah's mind reeled, trying to process the impossibility of what she was hearing. Vanessa wasn't even at Mom's funeral. She was grieving in her own way. Richard's jaw tightened, that familiar vein pulsing at his temple. "And frankly, Sarah, your military career makes you difficult to be around." Each word landed like a slap, precise and devastating. "You're too intense, too questioning, too demanding of truth." Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her feet, the perfect afternoon crumbling into nightmare. "But this is my engagement party. And it's beautiful." Richard's smile returned, cold and plastic. "Consider it my parting gift." In the distance, Marcus's laughter rang out, bright and innocent, unaware that Sarah's world was disintegrating. "After today, I don't want to see you at family events." Richard straightened his tie with casual indifference. "You're a grown woman with your own life now." Sarah's voice came out as a broken whisper. "Dad, please." "This isn't a negotiation, Sarah." His tone was final, businesslike, the same voice he used to fire employees. "It's simply how things need to be." He turned and walked away, his shoes crunching on the scattered glass from her fallen champagne flute. Sarah stood frozen among her mother's roses, their sweet fragrance now cloying and suffocating. 20 feet away, her engagement party continued in full swing. Guests laughed and danced, completely unaware that the guest of honor's heart had just been shattered into 1,000 pieces. Marcus appeared at the rose garden's entrance, his face glowing with happiness. "There you are. Everyone's asking for the happy couple." Sarah looked at the man she loved, at the family that had just disowned her, at the life she'd thought was beginning. She forced her lips into a smile that felt like broken glass. "Coming, sweetheart." But as she took Marcus's offered arm and walked back toward the celebration, Sarah Miller made a silent promise. Her father wanted her to disappear? She would disappear. But not in the way he expected. 6 months before the engagement. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and dying roses. Margaret Miller lay propped against sterile white pillows, her once vibrant auburn hair now thin and gray. At 58, cancer had stolen her strength, but not her dignity. Sarah sat beside the bed, holding her mother's frail hand, watching machines monitor each labored breath. "Promise me something, sweetheart." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, each word an effort that cost her dearly. Sarah leaned closer, her heart breaking at how small her mother looked in the hospital bed. "Anything, Mom." Margaret's green eyes, the same shade as Sarah's, still held their familiar fire. "Never let anyone erase who you are." The words carried weight beyond their simplicity, decades of hard-earned wisdom compressed into 8 syllables. "Your father." Margaret paused, gathering strength. "He thinks strength means taking what you want without consequence." Sarah felt tears threatening, but Margaret squeezed her hand with surprising force. "But real strength is protecting what matters, even when it costs you everything." Through the hospital window, Richard's voice echoed from the hallway. He was on his phone, discussing a real estate deal, while his wife lay dying 10 feet away. Margaret's jaw tightened, that familiar Miller stubbornness Sarah had inherited in full measure. I'm leaving you the apartment on Maple Street. The little two-bedroom where Margaret had spent her childhood, inherited from Sarah's grandmother decades ago. It's not much, but it's yours completely. Sarah remembered that apartment cozy rooms filled with handmade quilts and the scent of fresh-baked cookies. The place where Margaret had retreated when Richard's affairs became too painful to ignore. Mom, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Margaret's voice grew stronger, more determined. That apartment is where I learned to be myself again after each betrayal. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken pain. Richard's laughter drifted in from the hallway, loud and inappropriate in the hushed hospital atmosphere. He brought her here yesterday, Margaret whispered. Vanessa. The name tasted bitter on her dying lips. Sarah's blood turned to ice. He brought his mistress to the hospital? Margaret nodded, her eyes closing with exhaustion and heartbreak. She waited in the parking lot while he visited for exactly 15 minutes. Each word was a dagger, precise and devastating. Then they went to dinner at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Richard had proposed 35 years ago. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, hot and dangerous. Mom, I'll talk to him. Number. Margaret's eyes snapped open, suddenly alert and fierce. Promise me you'll be smarter than that. Her grip on Sarah's hand tightened like a vice. Promise me you'll protect your dignity the way I never learned to protect mine. Outside in the hallway, Richard's voice grew louder, discussing profit margins with casual indifference. Margaret's breathing grew shallower, each breath a visible struggle. The apartment, Sarah. Her voice was fading, but her message remained crystal clear. It's not just a place, it's proof that we existed before him. Sarah nodded through her tears, understanding the weight of what her mother was giving her. I promise, Mom. Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her gaunt features back into the beautiful woman Sarah remembered from childhood. You're stronger than I ever was, sweetheart. 3 days later, Margaret Miller died alone. Richard had stepped out to take a business call, and Vanessa was getting her nails done. Only Sarah held her mother's hand as she drew her final breath. 2 weeks after the funeral, Sarah stood in the doorway of her mother's apartment, keys trembling in her hand. The space felt sacred, untouched by Richard's betrayals and Vanessa's poison. Margaret's favorite armchair still held the impression of her body. Her reading glasses lay folded on the side table next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. The kitchen windowsill displayed a row of herb plants, basil, rosemary, thyme still green and thriving. Sarah walked through each room slowly, breathing in the lingering scent of her mother's lavender perfume. This was where Margaret had found peace during the worst storms of her marriage, where she'd taught Sarah to braid friendship bracelets and make chocolate chip cookies from scratch, where she'd quietly cried after discovering Richard's first affair, then dried her tears and chose dignity over divorce. In the bedroom, Sarah found her mother's journal tucked beneath a stack of photo albums. The leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling. Sarah opened to the final entry, dated just 1 week before Margaret's death. Sarah is everything I hoped she would become: strong, principled, unafraid of truth. Asterisk. I pray she never lets anyone diminish her light the way I let Richard diminish mine. Asterisk. This apartment is her sanctuary now, proof that women like us don't just survive, we endure with grace. Asterisk. May she use it to remember that some things are worth fighting for. Asterisk. Sarah closed the journal, her mother's words echoing in her heart. Through the apartment's front window, she could see the Miller mansion in the distance. The house where her father was already erasing every trace of his wife's existence. Where Vanessa's clothes now hung in Margaret's closet. Where her mother's antique vases had been replaced with modern art. Where 35 years of marriage were being systematically deleted. But here, in this small apartment, with its quilted walls and herb garden, Margaret's spirit remained untouchable. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would keep this apartment as long as she lived. not just as a real estate investment, but as a shrine to dignity. A reminder that some betrayals demand justice. And when the time came when Richard finally pushed too far, this apartment would become her launching pad for a reckoning he never saw coming. Margaret Miller had taught her daughter well. Sometimes protecting what matters requires strategic patience. Sometimes strength means waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment was closer than Richard Miller could possibly imagine. Sarah Miller's Revenge, Part 4. The night after the engagement party. Sarah stared at the ceiling of her downtown apartment, still wearing her engagement dress. The silk felt heavy now, suffocating, like a beautiful shroud wrapped around her shattered dreams. Marcus slept peacefully beside her, his face relaxed in innocent slumber. He had no idea that his fiancée's world had imploded 6 hours ago. The bedside clock glowed 3:17 a.m. in harsh red numbers. Sarah's mind raced, replaying her father's words like a broken record. Disappear from this family forever. The cruelty of it still took her breath away. She slipped quietly from bed, padding barefoot to the kitchen window. The city sparkled below, millions of lights marking millions of lives continuing their normal patterns. But Sarah's life had veered off course completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from her Navy friend Jessica. "Best engagement party ever. So happy for you." Sarah almost laughed at the bitter irony. Best party ever. Worst betrayal imaginable. She made coffee with shaking hands, the familiar ritual helping steady her racing thoughts. In the Navy, they'd taught her to find clarity in chaos. When the world explodes around you, identify your target, her commanding officer had always said. Then strike with precision. Sarah had survived combat deployments in hostile territory. She'd made life or death decisions under enemy fire. This was just another kind of warfare. She opened her laptop and began researching property law, banking regulations, estate planning. By dawn, she had a plan. 8 a.m. the next morning. Sarah stood in front of her mother's apartment building, keys heavy in her palm. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Inside that apartment, Margaret's spirit still lingered in every corner. But today, Sarah would honor her mother's memory in a different way. She unlocked the door and stepped inside for what she knew would be the last time. The herb garden on the windowsill needed watering. The crossword puzzle still lay unfinished on the side table. Sarah walked through each room, memorizing details she'd carry in her heart forever. Her mother's favorite armchair, worn smooth from years of quiet contemplation. The kitchen where Margaret had taught her to make apple pie from scratch. The bedroom where her mother had written those final journal entries about dignity and strength. At 9:15 a.m., Sarah called the real estate agent she'd researched online. "I need to sell a property today," she said, her voice steady with military precision. "Cash sale, no contingencies, whatever it takes." The agent's voice perked up with interest. "That's unusual, but certainly doable for the right price." "Price isn't the issue," Sarah replied. Speed Island. By noon, 3 investors had toured the apartment. By 2 p.m., Sarah had accepted an offer for $75,000 cash. $20,000 below market value, but available immediately. She signed the papers with a steady hand, each signature sealing her mother's sanctuary away forever. But Margaret's real legacy wasn't brick and mortar, it was the steel backbone she'd given her daughter. 2:30 p.m. First National Bank. Sarah walked into the bank where her parents had maintained their accounts for 30 years. She wore her Navy dress uniform, every ribbon and insignia polished to perfection. The bank manager, Mrs. Patterson, recognized her immediately. "Sarah, I was so sorry to hear about your mother." Sarah's smile was warm but purposeful. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'm actually here about some account irregularities I discovered in Mom's estate papers." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted to professional concern. "What kind of irregularities?" Sarah opened her briefcase, revealing stacks of legal documents she'd spent all morning preparing. It appears my mother never removed her name from several joint accounts with my father. The bank manager's eyes widened as she scanned the paperwork. And as executor of her estate, I have legal authority to freeze those accounts pending investigation. Sarah's voice remained calm, but her eyes held the intensity of someone who'd found their target. I've discovered some concerning transactions that occurred during my mother's final illness. Each word was carefully chosen, legally precise. Funds were transferred to accounts belonging to a Miss Vanessa Henderson while Mom was hospitalized. Mrs. Patterson's face went pale as she pulled up the account records on her computer screen. Oh my. The transactions were all there, stark black numbers telling the story of Richard's betrayal. Expensive jewelry purchases, luxury hotel stays, romantic dinners, all paid for with money that legally belonged to Margaret's estate. I need immediate freezes on accounts ending in 4,782, 9,156, and 3,301, Sarah said. Those were the accounts Richard shared with Vanessa, the financial foundation of their relationship. Mrs. Patterson's fingers flew across her keyboard, implementing the freezes with professional efficiency. This could take 90 days to resolve, she warned. Sarah's smile held no warmth. I'm counting on it. 4 p.m., Sarah's apartment. Sarah sat in her kitchen, $75,000 in cash on the table before her. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop for the past hour. Richard's name flashed across the screen for the 7th time. She let it go to voicemail, then played his increasingly panicked messages. Message 1. Sarah, there's some problem with my accounts. Call me. Message 7. What the hell have you done? Call me now. The desperation in his voice was music to her ears. Marcus walked through the front door, still glowing from the previous night's celebration. Hey, beautiful. How are you feeling after last night? Sarah looked at the man she loved, knowing she could never tell him the whole truth. Some battles had to be fought alone. I feel like everything's finally falling into place, she said. And for the first time since her father's betrayal, she meant it. The war had begun, and Sarah Miller had drawn first blood. Her mother would be proud. 6 p.m., the same day. Sarah's apartment door shook under the force of Richard's pounding fist. Open this door right now. His voice carried through the hallway like thunder, raw with fury and desperation. Sarah set down her coffee cup with deliberate calm. She'd been expecting this visit for the past 2 hours. The door rattled again under his assault. Sarah, I know you're in there. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, confusion written across his face. Is that your father? Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. He sounds upset about something. The understatement hung in the air between them like smoke. Maybe I should answer it, Marcus offered, moving toward the door. Number. Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. This is between him and me. She walked to the door and opened it slowly, revealing Richard Miller in full fury. His usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from rushing across town. Behind him stood Vanessa, her makeup streaked with tears, clutching a designer purse like a lifeline. What have you done? Richard's voice was barely controlled rage. Sarah stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter with mock politeness. Hello, Dad. Don't you hello, Dad, me? Richard stormed into her living room, his face purple with indignation. The bank called me an hour ago. His voice cracked with disbelief and fury. They said my accounts are frozen. Sarah closed the door softly, her movements measured and precise. That's unfortunate. The casual response only inflamed Richard's rage further. Unfortunately? Unfortunately? He whirled to face her, his eyes wild with desperation. Do you have any idea what you've done? Sarah's expression remained perfectly neutral, her military training serving her well. I've protected my mother's estate, as is my legal obligation. Vanessa sobbed from the corner, her perfectly manicured fingers shaking. The credit cards aren't working, she whimpered. The bank said all our accounts are under investigation. Richard turned his fury on his daughter with renewed force. This is insane! You can't just freeze my money. Sarah's voice remained deadly calm. Actually, I can. She moved to her kitchen counter, retrieving a folder of legal documents. Every account you share with Miss Henderson was opened using assets from Mom's estate. The papers rustled as she spread them across her coffee table. Technically, that money was never entirely yours to begin with. Richard's face went from purple to ashen as he scanned the documents. This is impossible. Mom never removed her name from those accounts, Sarah continued. And since I'm executor of her estate, I have full authority to investigate suspicious transfers. Her finger traced a line of highlighted transactions. Like the $50,000 transferred to Miss Henderson's personal account while Mom was dying in the hospital. Vanessa's sob caught in her throat, her eyes darting between Richard and Sarah. Richard, you said that money was yours. It was mine, Richard exploded. This is my daughter having some kind of breakdown. Sarah's laugh was cold and sharp. Breakdown? She stood slowly, her posture shifting into the commanding presence that had led troops through combat zones. I've never been more clear-headed in my life. Richard pointed a shaking finger at her. You're destroying this family. What family? Sarah's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. You told me to disappear from this family forever. The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was upset about your questions. You were protecting your mistress's feelings. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more authoritative. You chose her comfort over your own daughter. Marcus stepped forward, his face pale with shock. Mr. Miller, what is she talking about? Richard's eyes darted wildly, trapped between his lies and the truth. It's complicated, Marcus. No, it's simple. Sarah's voice commanded the room. At my engagement party, Dad pulled me aside and told me I was no longer welcome in this family. Marcus's face went white with disbelief. That can't be true. Ask him. Sarah's gaze never left her father's face. Tell my fiancé what you said to me yesterday. Richard's composure cracked completely. You were questioning Vanessa. You were making her uncomfortable. I asked why she was at Mom's hospital when she'd never visited before. Sarah's voice remained steady, professional. That made her uncomfortable enough to have me banished? Vanessa stepped forward, her tears replaced by desperate anger. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. Sarah turned her attention to the younger woman with laser focus. You wanted my mother's place in this family, and I was an inconvenient reminder of her existence. That's not true. Then explain the credit card charges for jewelry, while Mom was in hospice care. Vanessa's face crumpled, caught in her own greed. Richard made one last desperate attempt at control. Sarah, you will unfreeze those accounts immediately. Number. The single word carried the weight of absolute finality. You erased me from this family. Sarah's voice grew stronger with each syllable. You no longer have the right to demand anything from me. Richard's face twisted with rage and desperation. I'm your father. Fathers don't abandon their daughters for their mistresses. Sarah stood tall, unshakable, her mother's strength flowing through her like steel. You made your choice yesterday. Now live with the consequences. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Miller, the man who'd built an empire through intimidation and force, stood powerless before his daughter's unwavering resolve. For the first time in his life, he'd met someone stronger than his own will. And that someone was the daughter he'd thrown away. 3 days after the confrontation, the law office of Harrison and Associates felt like a mausoleum. Dark mahogany paneling and leather-bound legal volumes created an atmosphere of hushed reverence. Sarah sat across from William Harrison, her mother's longtime attorney, watching him review a thick manila folder. His weathered hands moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 40 years handling family secrets. "I apologize for the delay in contacting you," Harrison said, his voice grave. "Your mother left very specific instructions about the timing of this meeting." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued by the mysterious urgency in his tone. "What kind of instructions?" Harrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, studying the documents before him. "She specified that you were only to receive this information if certain conditions were met." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Specifically, if your father began cohabitating with another woman before the first anniversary of her death." Sarah's blood turned cold. "Mom knew about Vanessa?" "Your mother was a very perceptive woman." Harrison's smile was sad but knowing. "She suspected your father's infidelity long before her diagnosis." He opened the folder, revealing pages of legal documents bearing Margaret's careful signature. She spent the final months of her life preparing for various contingencies. Sarah stared at her mother's handwriting, each letter formed with deliberate care despite her weakening condition. She updated her will 6 times during her final hospital stay. Harrison's voice carried deep respect for his deceased client, each revision more carefully crafted than the last. The attorney spread several documents across his polished desk. "Your mother's estate was far more complex than your father realized." Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. "Complex how?" "The family home, the vacation properties, the investment accounts, all purchased with inheritance money from your grandmother." Harrison pointed to highlighted sections of legal text. "Technically, those assets belonged to your mother's family lineage, not marital property." Sarah felt her world shifting as the implications became clear. "What does that mean exactly?" Harrison pulled out a document marked Final Will and Testament in elegant script. "Your mother included what we call a dignity clause." His finger traced the relevant paragraph. "If your father remarried or cohabitated with another woman within 2 years of her death." Sarah held her breath, sensing a revelation that would change everything. "The majority of the estate transfers immediately to you." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The house, the vacation cottage in the Hamptons, the investment portfolio, all of it. Harrison's voice remained professionally neutral, but his eyes held satisfaction. "Your mother was protecting her daughter's inheritance from potential complications." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the legal language. "But Dad's been living with Vanessa for 2 months." "Exactly." Harrison leaned back in his leather chair. "Your mother anticipated this scenario with remarkable accuracy." He produced another document, this one bearing recent notarization stamps. "I've been monitoring the situation per your mother's instructions." Vanessa moved into the family home 6 weeks after the funeral. Sarah felt tears welling up, but they were tears of amazement rather than grief. "Mom protected me even after death." "Your mother loved you deeply," Harrison confirmed. "She also understood your father's character better than he understood himself." The attorney gathered the documents into a neat stack. "There's more." Sarah looked up, wondering what other surprises her mother had left behind. "The frozen accounts you mentioned in your phone call yesterday?" Harrison's smile was almost mischievous. "Those were funded entirely with money from your mother's estate." Sarah's jaw dropped as the full picture crystallized. "Every penny your father spent on Miss Henderson was technically theft from your inheritance." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique grandfather clock. "How much are we talking about?" Sarah whispered. Harrison consulted his notes with professional precision. "The estate totals approximately $2.8 million. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "The house alone is worth $1.2 million. Her mother had been far wealthier than anyone realized. "Your grandmother's inheritance was invested wisely over the decades." Harrison's voice carried deep admiration for Margaret's financial acumen. "Your mother never told your father the true value of her assets." Sarah felt a surge of pride for the woman who'd raised her. When do I? The transfer begins immediately. Harrison was already reaching for his phone. I'll file the necessary paperwork this afternoon. Sarah stood slowly, her legs unsteady as the magnitude of her mother's gift sank in. Your father will receive official notification within 48 hours. The attorney's tone grew more serious. He'll have 30 days to vacate the family home. Sarah thought about Richard's panicked face during their confrontation 3 days ago. He'd believed the frozen accounts were his only problem. Does he have any legal recourse? None whatsoever. Harrison's confidence was absolute. Your mother's will is ironclad, witnessed by 3 attorneys and notarized multiple times. Sarah walked to the office window, looking out at the city where her father was probably still scrambling to understand his financial crisis. She knew exactly what would happen. Your mother spent months planning this protection for you. Harrison joined her at the window. She wanted to ensure that your father's choices had consequences. Sarah touched the pearl necklace at her throat, her mother's final gift. She also wanted to make sure you inherited what rightfully belonged to your maternal family line. The afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, warming Sarah's face. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly protected. Margaret Miller's love had reached across death itself to shield her daughter from Richard's greed. The apartment sale, the frozen accounts, the confrontation Sarah had thought she was fighting alone. But her mother had been with her every step of the way. The war wasn't just won. It had been won before the first battle was ever fought. 1 week after the will reading, the Miller family's annual 4th of July barbecue buzzed with uncomfortable tension. 40 relatives gathered on the mansion's sprawling lawn, unaware they were witnessing the final act of a family drama. Sarah stood near the pool, watching her father work the crowd with desperate charm. Richard moved from group to group, his politician's smile masking the panic beneath. He'd received the eviction notice that morning. Uncle Tom approached Sarah with obvious concern etched across his weathered face. Heard there's some trouble with your father's finances? Word traveled fast in their small family circle. Sarah sipped her lemonade, choosing her words carefully. There have been some complications with Mom's estate. Across the lawn, Richard's voice grew louder as he regaled cousins with embellished business stories. Vanessa clung to his arm like a designer accessory, her smile brittle and forced. The younger woman had aged years in the past week. Sarah! Richard's voice cut across the party, chatter like a blade. Come here, sweetheart. His tone carried false warmth that made Sarah's skin crawl. She walked over slowly, aware that every family member was watching. I was just telling everyone about your little misunderstanding with the bank. Richard's laugh was too loud, too forced. You know how these military types can be so rigid about following procedures. Sarah felt the familiar calm descend, her combat training kicking in automatically. What misunderstanding is that, Dad? Richard's smile faltered slightly before snapping back into place. Oh, you know all that business about freezing accounts over paperwork technicalities. He gestured dismissively, playing to the audience of relatives. Sometimes daughters get a little overzealous about protecting their inheritance. Murmurs rippled through the gathered family members. Sarah recognized the strategy immediately: public manipulation, designed to make her look greedy and unreasonable. Is that what you're calling it? Sarah asked. A paperwork technicality? Richard's jaw tightened, but he maintained his practiced smile. Well, what else would you call questioning your own father's financial decisions? The crowd grew quieter, sensing drama brewing beneath the surface pleasantries. Aunt Linda shifted uncomfortably, her burger forgotten on her paper plate. I'd call it protecting Mom's memory. Sarah's voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent lawn. Mom who died alone while you were having dinner with your mistress. The words landed like grenades, exploding the pretense of family harmony. Richard's face went white, then flushed deep red. Sarah! Mom who spent her final weeks watching you parade Vanessa around town. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more commanding. Mom who knew you'd been stealing money from her medical fund to buy jewelry for another woman. Cousin Jennifer gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You need to stop this right now. Stop what, Dad? Sarah stood taller, her military bearing evident in every line of her body. Stop telling the truth about how you treated your dying wife? The family circle pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding revelation. Uncle Tom's face darkened with understanding and disgust. Richard, is this true? Of course it's not true. Richard's voice cracked with desperation. My daughter is having some kind of breakdown since the engagement. Sarah laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Breakdown? You told me to disappear from this family forever, at my own engagement party. The admission sent shockwaves through the gathered relatives. Aunt Linda's face went pale. Richard, you didn't. I was protecting my relationship. Richard's composure finally cracked completely. Sarah was interrogating Vanessa, making her feel unwelcome. Sarah turned to face the entire family, her voice carrying the authority of a military briefing. I asked why Vanessa was at Mom's hospital when she'd never visited before. I asked why she had a key to the house 3 days after the funeral. Each revelation hit the family like physical blows. I asked why $50,000 from Mom's medical account was transferred to Vanessa's personal checking. Uncle Tom stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Richard, what the hell is wrong with you? Richard pointed a shaking finger at his daughter. She's lying. She's trying to destroy our family. What family? Sarah's voice cut through his protests like steel. The family you threw me out of to protect your mistress's feelings? Vanessa finally found her voice, high and desperate. You don't understand the situation. Sarah turned her full attention to the younger woman. I understand that you moved into my mother's bedroom while it still smelled like her perfume. The crowd recoiled as if struck. I understand that you're wearing my mother's jewelry right now. Vanessa's hand flew to the diamond necklace at her throat, Margaret's anniversary gift from 20 years ago. Richard gave it to me. Richard stole it from Mom's jewelry box while she was dying. Sarah's voice remained steady, professional, devastating. Along with everything else he could liquidate to fund your lifestyle. The silence that followed was deafening. 40 family members stood frozen, watching Richard Miller's carefully constructed image crumble into dust. Uncle Tom was the first to move, walking deliberately toward Sarah. Honey, I am so sorry. His weathered hand found her shoulder. Your mother was the best woman any of us ever knew. Aunt Linda followed, then Cousin Jennifer, then others. One by one, the family chose sides. And side by side, they stood with Sarah. Richard found himself isolated with only Vanessa for support, watching his world collapse in front of everyone who mattered. This isn't over, he whispered. Sarah looked at the man who'd once been her hero, now revealed as nothing more than a selfish stranger. Yes, Dad. It Island. 6 months later. The family mansion stood empty in the autumn twilight, its windows dark and lifeless. A for sale sign swayed gently in the October breeze, marking the end of the Miller dynasty. Richard and Vanessa had moved into a cramped apartment across town, their relationship strained by financial ruin. The woman who dreamed of luxury now worked double shifts at a department store. Richard's real estate empire had collapsed without the financial foundation he'd never realized belonged to his wife. His reputation in the business community lay in tatters, destroyed by whispers of embezzlement and betrayal. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. Business partners refused his calls. The man who'd once commanded respect now inspired only pity and disgust. The Margaret Miller Foundation. Grand opening. Sarah stood before a gleaming building in downtown, its brass nameplate catching the morning Sunday. The Margaret Miller Foundation for Military Families occupied 3 floors of pristine office space. A portrait of Margaret hung in the lobby, not the frail hospital patient, but the vibrant woman she'd been. Sarah had chosen a photograph from their last Christmas together, when her mother's eyes still sparkled with life. "We're here to help families like yours," Sarah explained to a young woman clutching her toddler's hand. The visitor's husband had been deployed overseas for 8 months, leaving her to manage alone. Childcare assistance, emergency financial support, legal advocacy, whatever you need. Sarah's voice carried the warmth her mother had always shown to strangers in need. Behind them, volunteers bustled through rooms filled with donated clothing, toys, and household supplies. Uncle Tom supervised the furniture distribution, his retired carpenter's hands still strong and capable. Aunt Linda managed the intake interviews, her grandmother's kindness inherited in full measure. The entire family had rallied around Sarah's vision, eager to honor Margaret's memory through service. "Your mother would be so proud," whispered Mrs. Patterson from the bank. She'd become one of the foundation's most generous donors after witnessing Sarah's courage firsthand. "She always said you had her heart for helping others." Sarah smiled, touching the pearl necklace she wore every day now. "She's still teaching me, even now." Evening. Sarah's new home. Sarah's townhouse was modest but warm, filled with her mother's rescued furniture and rescued memories. The dining room table where Margaret had helped with homework, the reading chair where she'd told bedtime stories, the kitchen island where they'd baked cookies every Christmas morning. Marcus found her in the living room, surrounded by foundation, paperwork, and grant applications. "How was the opening day?" he asked, settling beside her on Margaret's favorite sofa. "Overwhelming." Sarah's eyes shone with exhaustion and satisfaction. "We helped 12 families today." She showed him a photograph, a military wife's relief after securing emergency childcare for her special needs son. Mom would have loved seeing that woman's face. Marcus wrapped his arms around his fiancée, marveling at her transformation. The broken woman from 6 months ago had emerged stronger, more purposeful than ever before. "Have you heard from your father?" Sarah shook her head, her expression peaceful rather than bitter. "He made his choice." She'd received one letter from Richard, begging for reconciliation and financial assistance. Sarah had returned it unopened. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay ashes. Late night, the memory room. Sarah lit a single white candle before her mother's image. The flame danced in the darkness, casting warm light across Margaret's gentle smile. "Mum, I kept my promise." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper in the sacred quiet. "I protected what you left behind." The foundation bore her mother's name and carried forward her spirit of selfless service. "I've learned to be strong the way you taught me." Sarah touched the portrait's glass, imagining her mother's approval. "And I've learned that real strength isn't about revenge." The candle flickered, almost as if responding to her words. "It's about using your power to protect people who can't protect themselves." Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy, but inside the memory room, peace reigned. Sarah had found her true inheritance, not money or property, but her mother's legacy of dignity and grace. Dawn, the new beginning. Sarah stood on her balcony in her navy dress uniform, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold. Today she would return to active duty, her leave of absence finally ended. Margaret Miller's daughter had not only survived her father's betrayal, she had transformed it into something beautiful. The war was over. Love had won.